In today's video, we're covering the midpoint formula. Be sure to watch to the end of the video as we cover many examples that you're likely to see, including a trick to help remember the formula if you ever forget. First, let's cover what a midpoint is. Say we had some point A over here and another point B up here. Between these 2 points, there is one point exactly in the middle, and that would be our midpoint. The formula for the midpoint is x1 plus x2 divided by 2, comma, y1 plus y2, also divided by 2. So what this means is that all we're doing is really finding the average between the 2 x points and then between the 2 y points, and that would be the exact middle, our midpoint. So for example, if we have a point A that's at 2, 3, and then point B, which is at 6, 7, and we're looking for the midpoint between these two, we can simply plug into our equation above. And I'll label these just to be clear. If this value is our x1, then next to it would be our y1. Over here, this would be the other x, or x2, and then we have y2. Now let's plug into the equation so we can find the midpoint. First we have x1, which is 2, and then plus our x2 value, which is 6. That gets divided by 2, comma, and then we'll take care of the y values. y1 is 3, plus y2, which is 7, also divided by 2. So this equals 2 plus 6 would be 8 over the 2, comma, and then 3 plus 7 over 2, which becomes 10 over 2. And then we just have to simplify. 8 over 2 becomes 4, and 10 over 2 is 5. So the midpoint between A and B is 4, 5. Here's another example. Say we have A at -3, 1, and point B is at 5, -7. To find the midpoint, all we need to do is plug each respective point into their positions. Just remember, if we designate this our x1, y1, then our second point must be x2, y2. The good thing about this formula is that between the x points and the y points, we have addition, which is commutative, meaning the order does not matter. So what's really important here is that you're only doing the x's together and averaging them by dividing by 2, and the same for the y's. You do not want to add the x and the y together. So in this case, our midpoint is equal to x1 is -3 plus x2, which is 5, divided by 2, comma, and then the y values. y1 is 1 plus our y2, which is a -7, so I'll put that in parentheses, over 2. And we solve like before. -3 plus 5 gives us 2, and that's over 2, comma, and then 1 plus -7 is like subtracting 7 from 1, and that gives us -6 over 2. Finally, we'll simplify. So our midpoint is equal to 2 over 2, which is just 1, comma, -6 over 2, which is -3. Now sometimes the points will not simplify to a whole number, so let's take a look at one of those examples. Now let's say point A is at 0, 3, and point B is at 5, -4. Let's plug into the midpoint formula. First, we need to add the 2 x's, and that would be 0 plus 5, and that gets divided by 2, comma, and the y's, 3 and -4. So 3 plus parentheses -4, also divided by 2. And now let's simplify. 0 plus 5 gives us 5, and we're still over 2, comma. 3 plus -4 will give us -1 over 2. Because these fractions will not simplify any further, we can leave this as our final result. The x value of the midpoint is 5/2, and the y value is -1/2. Now what if the given points are made up of fractions, and we need to find the midpoint? Let's look at one of those examples. Let's say point A is at 2/3, 2, and point B is at 4, -1/5. Nothing has changed as far as the formula goes, so we'll just plug in, and we'll deal with these fractions in just a moment. So the midpoint is still going to be our x1 value, remember this is our x1, so 2/3 plus our x2 value, which was 4. We're still going to divide by 2, comma, our y1 value, which was 2, plus y2, which was -1/5. We'll divide this by 2. And now we've completed the setup. So clearly right now, adding 2/3 with 4 and trying to divide that in half is not going to be so simple if we leave the fraction as is. So at this point, what we should do is break up just the x portion and the y portion. The x half is 2/3 plus 4 divided by 2. And in order to simply add the 2/3 with the 4, we can go ahead and multiply the entire numerator and the denominator by 3/3. And the reason we're doing this is to get rid of the 3 here. So we'll distribute the 3 into both parts, the 2/3 and the 4. 2/3 times 3 would give us 6/3, which is equivalent to 2. So our new number here for our x1 is going to be a 2. Then we have the plus 4 times 3, which is 12. But now, instead of dividing by 2, we still need to distribute the denominator's 3 and multiply that by the 2. So now we'll be dividing by 6. So this will become the x term of our midpoint that came from here. We can go ahead and now simplify this. 2 plus 12 gives us 14, and then divided by 6 is equal to, we can reduce this and get 7/3. So the x term of our midpoint is 7/3. Now we need to do the same with the y portion. So we have 2 plus -1/5 over 2. The problem we have here is we have a fraction in the numerator. So to get rid of the 5 down here, we'll go ahead and multiply this entire fraction by 5/5. Just like before, we need to distribute the 5 on top to both numbers, as well as multiply the 5 with the 2 on the bottom. This now gives us 5 times 2 is 10, and then plus -1/5 times 5, the 5s would cancel, and we're left with a -1. Now we just have to divide by the 2 times 5, which is 10, and simplify. 10 plus -1 is 9. We have 10 underneath, and that's as much as we can simplify the y point. Therefore, the midpoint in this problem is 7/3, 9/10. Now what if all the points were fractions? Let's take a look. So point A, let's say, is at 3/5, -1/4. And then B is at 5/2, 2/3. The formula remains the same. We'll need to add the two x's first. We have 3/5 plus 5/2. That will still get divided by 2, -1/4 plus 2/3, and still divided by 2. In order to add the fractions in these numerators, we need to find a common denominator for each part. So we're looking for the lowest common denominator between 5 and 2, which is the same as finding the least common multiple between 5 and 2. So like before, we're going to focus just on the x portion first. So we have 3/5 plus 5/2 all over 2. And the least common multiple between 5 and 2 would be 10. That's the first number. Both 2 and 5 will go into evenly. So like before, we'll multiply this entire fraction by that least common multiple and have 10/10. We need to distribute into both parts, as well as the 2 in the denominator. So now this equals 3 times 10 is 30. So we have 30/5 plus 10 times 5 is 50. So we have 50/2. And now instead of dividing by 2, we'll be dividing by 20. We can simplify. 30 divided by 5 is just 6. We have plus 50/2 is 25/20. And that equals 31/20. Since we cannot simplify this any further, this is now the x point of our midpoint. Now let's work out the y point. The y values were -1/4 plus the y2 value, which was 2/3, divided by 2. So again, we need to find the lowest common denominator between 4 and 3, and that number would be 12. So we'll go ahead and multiply this entire fraction by 12 over 12. We need to distribute. Negative 1/4 times 12 gives us negative 12 over 4. And then 2/3 times 12 would be 24 over 3. And that all goes over 2 times 12, 24. We'll go ahead and reduce. Negative 12 divided by 4 is negative 3, plus 24 over 3, which is 8, over 24. And that equals 5 over 24. This cannot be reduced any further, so therefore, our final midpoint value is 31 over 20, comma, 5 over 24. Now what happens if you're given one point as well as the midpoint and they ask you to find the second point? That's a very common problem type. So let's take a look. Let's say we're given point A at 1, 3, and we're told that the midpoint is at 4, 7. And now we need to find out what point B is. Remember, point B, we said, was going to be our x2, y2. So we can still make use of the formula in order to solve our B point. So we know this formula is equal to the midpoint. In this case, we know that's equal to 4, 7, and therefore, this portion with the x's is going to have to equal 4 in the end to give us the new x value. And the same with the y's, that will have to give us the 7. So let's break this up. We'll start with the x values that we know. So we have an x1 here, which is 1, plus we don't have an x2 yet, so that will be our unknown. It still gets divided by 2. And we know this must equal the x value of the midpoint. So this has to equal 4. Now we just use algebra to solve for x2. So the first thing is, to get rid of the 2 down here, we'll go ahead and multiply this entire side by 2. And we need to do the same to the other side. These 2's will cancel. And we're left with 1 plus x2 equals 4 times 2 is 8. Subtract 1 from both sides. So now we know x2 is equal to 7. So far, we have our x2 value of the B point. Let's do the same, but with the y values to solve for y2. y1 is 3, plus y2 is unknown, over 2. And this must equal the y point of our midpoint, which in this case is 7. So this equals 7. Using algebra, we'll multiply both sides by 2 to get rid of the 2 in the denominator. These cancel. We're left with 3 plus y2 is equal to 14. Now subtract 3 from both sides to isolate y2. y2 now must equal 11. Therefore, our point B is at 7, 11. As promised, now we're going to look at how you can still solve for the midpoint, even if you forget the formula. These examples are best used with whole numbers, so even if you have a problem with fractions, you can still use this in order to remember and figure out how the midpoint formula works. Let's say we have a point A at 2, 1, and B at 8, 9. So let's see what it looks like when these points are plotted on a coordinate plane. It won't be exact, but let's say 2, 1 is about here, and then 8, 9 is up here. Remember that the midpoint is the exact middle of the distance between these 2 points, which would be somewhere around here. Let's take a look at how much we actually moved on the x side and the y side to get from point A to B. So this value, the x value here, starts at 2, and we're going all the way over to 8. So this right here is at 8. In order to get to the midpoint, we need to move half as much of the distance that we did in both the x and the y directions. So for the x portion, if we went from 2 to 8, that entire distance is 6. To get to the midpoint, we have to move half that much. Half of 6 is 3. So if we only went 3 over, our new x value, which is for the midpoint, is 2 plus 3, or 5. Same thing goes for the y point. Here, we were at a height of just 1, and we went all the way up to this point, which was at 9. So the distance from 1 to 9 is 8, and therefore to go halfway up means to go up just 4. So we'll add 4 to the y value here. 1 plus 4 gives us 5. So our midpoint happens to be at 5, 5. We can quickly check this with the formula. We need to average the x values, so that's 2 plus 8 over 2, comma, and then the y values, 1 and 9. 1 plus 9 over 2. This equals 10 over 2, comma, 10 over 2, which simplifies to 5, 5, which does match. The same works if you were given just the A point and the midpoint and asked to find B over here. We know A was given at 2, 1, so the x value was 2, and if we were given the x value of the midpoint that was 5, that means that we went from 2 to 5, that's a distance of 3. So to get to the second point, we need to double that move. We have to move 3 more over to the right, which would be a total distance, like we saw, of 6. So we would add 6 to the 2, our initial x value, and get 8. Same for the y. We started at 1, we go to the midpoint, which is 5, and that's a total distance of 4. We need to double that to get to our b height, so we'll add 8 to the 1, and that gives us 9. Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, please smash that like button and subscribe for more videos.